Sheeta Sheets, hello everyone. How are all of you? Welcome to Enhancing and Supporting Effective and Equitable Tribal Juvenile Justice Systems. We are happy to have you with us today. We are going to have some wonderful facilitators from our partners at the National Native Children's Trauma Center, Dr. Marilyn Zimmerman and Laura Gay, MSW. So thank you again for joining. Next slide, please. My name is Tasha Friday, and I am the Assistant Director of the Tribal Youth Resource Center. I am Wichita Kiowa and Caddo from Oklahoma. And as part of our work here, we are committed to bringing an in-depth understanding and appreciation of American Indian and Alaska Native history, customs, and Indigenous justice systems. And so that's what we hope to accomplish through our online learning event today, and just always keeping in mind that Native youth benefit from a value held by many Native people, and that's that our youth are sacred. So we appreciate all of your presence and attention here today, and all of the work that each of you is doing across Indian country to benefit our youth and future generations. So welcome again, and let's have a great learning series. I'll turn it over now to Laura Smith for technical support.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Tasha. This is Laura Smith with Tribal Law and Policy Institute. I serve as a program assistant with the Tribal Youth Resource Center, and I will walk us through just a few quick tech reminders today to help our time together go as smoothly as possible. First, just to note that all attendees will be muted during this presentation to help cut down on any background noise. There will be an opportunity or opportunities for discussion, and at that point we'll let you all know if you would like to share over voice, you can raise your hand and then we'll unmute you individually to speak, or at any point during our time together today, you're welcome to use the chat box to participate in any group discussion. And there's an option when you send a message in the chat, you can send a message to only the organizers of the event, or you can select an option to send a message to all of the other participants who are also on the line. Finally, at any point during our session, you can submit a question by clicking on the Q&A little box. It's in the black bar at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer any questions that you share. And lastly, we will share a link to an evaluation for today's session in the chat box, and we'll also send that out over email, and we would be really grateful if you could participate. It really helps us out. And with that, I'll hand it over to the fantastic Dr. Zimmerman for our opening today.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to start us out in thinking about what resilience means in tribal communities with tribal families, and reminding us that at least for Northern Plains tribes, and I'm sure every tribe has this version of developing resiliency within the context of their own tribes. For Northern Plains tribes, we call it counting coup, and it involves the winning of prestige against an enemy. So Native American warriors often won prestige by acts of bravery in the face of an enemy, which could be recorded in various ways or retold as stories. Any blow struck against the enemy counted as a coup, but the most prestigious acts included touching an enemy with a hand, a bow, or a coup stick, and then escaping unharmed. In some nations, simply riding up to an enemy and touching him with a short stick and riding away unscathed was counting coup. So counting coup can also be involved in like stealing enemy's horses or from his lodge, and then understanding that risk or injury or death was required to count coup. So escaping unharmed while counting coup was considered a high honor than being wounded in an attempt. So those are a really dramatic way of thinking about building resiliency. So we're just want to think about what are those milestones? What are those? What are the developmental tasks that our adolescents have to engage in? How do they learn to manage their emotions, learn new skills like algebra? How do they build warm relationships with their peers? And that's what we're going to think about as we think about strengthening the resilience of our youth and strengthening our families and communities. Next slide. So I guess I'll start. I am Marilyn Bruyere Zimmerman, and I am an enrolled citizen of the Fort Peck, Assiniboine, and Sioux tribes. And our homelands are on about 2 million acres in the northeast corner of Montana. And I am also a descendant, Ojibwe descendant, and a Nawa descendant. And just want to say welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Hi there. My name is Laura Gay, and I'm a training and technical assistance specialist for the National Native Children's Trauma Center. And I too just wanted to thank each one of you for your time today and attendance. And I'm hoping that you and yours are healthy and staying safe. So we will roll into this.
All right. So just wanting to let you all know what the objectives for this hour together is. First, we want to help all of us think about or understand why building resilience is an evidence-based approach. What does it look like, and how it can be utilized in our personal relationships, but also utilized within the systems that we work in and the communities that we live in. We'll review a tiered response to creating safety and accountability for tribal juvenile justice, and thinking about how we do that within the context of tribal justice systems. Then finally, we'll share available resilience training and technical assistance opportunities and resources to address safety and accountability. Next slide. So what is resilience? How should we be thinking about it? I gave a little bit of a clue. It's that ability of a child or an adolescent to overcome or recover from a traumatic event, for one thing, or thinking of resilience as a process of bouncing back. But unlike counting poo, resilience is not about extraordinary events or heroic measures, though it can be. Rather, resilience is built when we're offered meaningful support and love from others. And we must remember that some of the children and youth who experience a traumatic event may be significantly impacted. And it's not the fault of the child or the youth, and should not be seen as a sign of weakness for failing. I always think about, toddlers, when they start to learn to walk, they start to toddle. We never think or shame a baby for falling down, right? We're so excited if they only take one step and fall into our arms. That's the same sort of mindset that we have to have with our children and our youth. And how do we develop and build this resiliency? And what kind of supports do we offer, or what kind of services can we offer within the context of the agency that we work in to support resilience and recovery in our youth? Next slide. So science tells us that the interactions between genes and the environment shape human development. Despite many of us who have been led to believe prior to some good research that genes are somehow set in stone, we now know that early experiences can determine how genes are turned on or turned off, and whether some are expressed at all. The healthy development of our organs, including our brain, depends on how much and when certain genes are activated to do certain tasks. The experience that children have early in life, therefore, play a crucial role in the development of their brain architecture. And ensuring that the children have appropriate growth-promoting early experiences is an investment in their ability to become healthy, productive members of society. Next slide. So what does it look like? So it looks as if when a youth or a child is challenged and they experience, we always like to say, what's the difference between just a stressful event versus a toxic stressful event? And it really is that ability to meet a challenge or have it disrupted potentially by a challenge that's unmet or by a traumatic event. And, but after a little bit of support from some caregivers, whether it's their parents or a teacher or a coach or a peer, they return to functioning, right? They get back to normal and their usual levels of functioning. But I want to make sure that we understand that as we work with some of the youth that we work with in juvenile justice, that resilience in one area of their life is not necessarily a predictor of resilience in all other areas of their life. So as the slide says, it may be that an adolescent is really finding school challenging, but they have good, strong, solid peer relationships or good, solid relationships with their parents. So we have to think about how to develop and support the building resilience in those other areas that seem to be weakened by either distress or a traumatic event. Next slide.
Thank you, Marilyn. So as Marilyn had said, resilience is this interaction between biological predispositioning and environmental factors that ultimately determine a youth's ability to navigate adversity with minimal negative effects. I think this is really important to remember as we talk through different protective factors that insulate youth from trauma. American Indian and Alaska Native youth are born with a predisposition for resilience. It's passed down from relatives who have not only survived, but thrived in spite of colonialization's attempt to eliminate that very culture and traditional practices that foster strength. We all come into this world with a genetic predisposition towards resilience, some more than others. But that's not to say the youth who is not born with a propensity to easily bounce back from life's challenges is without hope. It's very much on the contrary to that. The environment in which that youth interacts has a measurable opportunity to build resilience through both our own personal interactions with them and through program service delivery. There are 4 protective factors with significant research supporting their ability to improve youth resilience. Or in other words, 4 factors that reduce those negative consequences of trauma and exposure and improve positive outcomes in spite of adversity. It's important as individuals who interact with youth and as programs who provide services for youth to consider how we can promote these in our everyday interactions. We'll walk through each one of these in more detail, but I did want to show here that truly they are interconnected. And at the core of all of it is having a strong cultural identity and being in connection with others. So further, as Marilyn had said earlier, that resilience in one area doesn't equate to resilience across the board necessarily. We often see programs designed to build resilience focus too much on what the research says of what builds resilience and less on the individual youth and family before them. So like trying to set up a youth with a mentor through the program when the youth already has someone they go to as a mentor. Build that person up. Don't try and force a relationship when a youth already has one that they're really invested in. If a youth is not interested in mindfulness activities, but likes to lift weights or run long distances, focus on their interests and find creative ways to teach using the activities they want to build mastery or activities that help them self-regulate. Connection to culture and spirituality supports resilience. What this looks like varies greatly, as you all know, from community to community and individual to individual. Having a sense that your life is part of something larger than yourself, that you have responsibilities to your tribe or to a higher power or to both, helps us get through hard times and respond positively in the aftermath. In tribal communities, young people might find a nourishing and supportive connection to their traditional culture and spirituality, which ultimately supports their self-identity and a really crucial developmental stage of life. So developmentally, adolescents are asking questions of belonging and connection. Questions like, who am I? Who are my people? What is my purpose here? A foundation rooted in their tribe's traditional traditions and teachings will support them on their path of discovering the answers to those questions. Some of these connections are connections and belonging that exist as a birthright, who their relatives are, what clan they belong to, what land is theirs. And then there are connections they make as they interact with the world around them through peer friendships and mentors or elders that provide them with guidance. Youth are also learning the cultural values that exist amongst their tribe and community. Are there gender roles they are watching for and being taught? How do they behave as a daughter, as a nephew, as a sister, as a grandson? And then what responsibilities do they have to contribute back to their family, to the community, to the tribe, and to their land? There was a 2016 study, Racial Discrimination, Cultural Resilience, and Stress. It was published by Spence and some of their colleagues. And it found that cultural resilience, that connection to tribe, place, and being part of something larger than yourself, compensated for the effect of racial discrimination on stress in a modest manner for Indigenous people. And this finding is significant given the very present experience of racism and discrimination youth are experiencing, Indigenous youth are experiencing, both presently and historically. And then there was also a study done by Chandler and Lalonde that found that cultural continuity, that sense of belonging and being connected to your tribe's past and responsible for the tribe's future survival, is among the strongest of all protective factors against suicide in young people. So we're going to do a poll here really quick. Laura, if you wouldn't mind setting that off for me. The question here is, does your program use culture and tradition to enhance youth resilience? And I gave you a couple answers. It's a select one situation. So yes, our program is rooted in building cultural knowledge and traditional skills. Somewhat, we have some elements that support cultural identity, but could do more. And no, not at this time. So if you guys wouldn't mind taking that poll for us to start our conversation, and then after you do that, before we share out, be thinking about this discussion question here of just, if you're willing to share what some of those practices are that you use with youth to help build their cultural identity and ultimately foster their resilience. So we'll give you a couple seconds to finish this poll, and then hopefully we'll be able to have a discussion about it after.
So 44 of you have already participated. Thank you so much. And responses are still trickling in. So we'll leave that up for just one more moment, and then we'll share the results.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, so I believe all of you can see this. 33% of you answered yes, our program's rooted in building cultural knowledge and traditional skills. That's incredible. And 57% said somewhat. We have some elements that support cultural identity, but could do more. And 11% or 5 of you said no, not at this time. So that, if we look at that, and okay, now I have to do math, 60, 90, almost 90% are using culture and traditional practices to help build resilience in youth. So I'm hoping that for those of you that do, you would be willing to raise your hand, and Laura Smith will unmute you so that you could share out vocally with everyone what some of those things are that you do that you found particularly effective, or feel free to chat it into the chat box and we can report out, we'll report out what those are as well. If anyone's willing to talk, I'm looking here on the chat box. Leona says, our tribe is partnering with the local school to combine youth leadership group with plans for a youth culture club. Population is just under 800 people and just over 100 youth between 13 to 18. Great, so setting up a youth culture club driven by youth. I love that. Our victim services provides daughters of tradition curriculum prior to the pandemic closure. Excellent. Our summer program had nature walks that encouraged students to use their native language to identify native plants, as well as encourage to walk with an elder to have conversations and encourage using the language. Excellent. So language development as a a key piece to that cultural identity, and for youth to be able to answer those questions. Who am I, and who are my people? I love that. I see one hand raised, and talking's permitted. So Arlana, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Thank
Yes.
you. Oh, feel free to share.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to share verbally. It's a little bit easier for me at this time, but I'm the director of the Oglala Lakota Children's Justice Center in Pine Ridge. And our mission and purposes is focused on, providing cultural Lakota services and application. And we use contemporary methods along with our traditional Lakota customs to provide comprehensive advocacy for children and their non-offending family members. So doing that, we really look at, providing with the first instructions and providing with the 7 sacred laws, which are identified in our code. Our children's code is written on natural law, and I was a part of that for 6 years, and it became enacted in 2007. So now evolving into we used to be a CASA program, but it was so, in the box with adjudicatory phase advocating for children. So now we advocate from the point of trauma throughout healing. And again, using those first instructions, the ceremony, and the advocacy. I'm actually writing a piece for a curriculum right now, identifying advocacy and how we do that from the point of trauma throughout healing in a culturally related way. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like an incredible movement you have going there. Give just a couple more seconds if anyone would be willing to share what that looks like within their programs. And if no one has anything else, we can move on. Oh, Nola said, our program encourages our students in our youth leadership against violence to look at traditional roles and relationships. Excellent. Right, so looking at what traditionally do relationships look like, romantic relationship, peer relationships, and kind of fighting against some of the intergenerational trauma symptoms, historical trauma symptoms that might lead to violence in relationship. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Right. Well, feel free to continue chatting in the chat box. We can come back to it if people have some discussion there to go back to, but we'll move on. Researchers have found over and over in all sorts of different contexts that the single most important protective factor for youth who experience adversity and stress is having at least one solid and trusting relationship with a supportive adult. Who the person or people are doesn't matter as much as the key characteristics of that relationship. So it has to be solid and stable, the support has to be unconditional, and that youth has to trust the person. What this kind of relationship does is insulate the youth who's experiencing adversity from the worst effects of it. Though they may still deal with perceived threats, the stress that results may not become so toxic that it causes physical and psychological wear and tear. The trusting relationship balances out the lack of trust that may come from other more troubling relationships the youth has. It provides structure and a place where the youth can go to get personalized attention of the type that allows them to build positive adaptive skills and healthy habits rather than maladaptive habits. And though there are other protective factors identified, resilience is fundamentally rooted in relationships. So when we think about the other things a program might implement to build resilience, it's crucial to consider how their approach builds connections to others for the youth. And for American Indian Alaska Native youth, it's critical to think about what traditional kinship networks that exist to build up and teach that youth, and consider how programs are working to establish those critical connections for the youth. And congruently, what supports exist to support the youth's relatives and the respective and traditional roles they have taken on. The more supportive adults, the better, but we can't forget the power that just a single connection has for youth learning to navigate life's ups and life's downs. Another protective factor that's common among young people who've responded positively to adversity is that they have a sense of mastery over their own lives. Youth who believe that they can overcome difficulties and shape their own destinies are much better positioned to ward off toxic stress and also develop adaptive skills than the youth who feel that their lives are completely shaped and determined by others or by their circumstances. Not everyone naturally feels a sense of mastery over their life circumstances. And for youth with a difficult home life or a youth who's experienced tremendous grief and loss, they may have very good reasons for feeling that they have little to no control over their destiny. But in our personal interactions with youth, a key way to build mastery is to offer choices and let the youth decide. This creates some autonomy for the youth and a sense of empowerment. Create opportunities to learn why a youth decided to do one thing over the other, and then they can begin to reflect on how and why they make the decisions in the way that they do. And as an adult, you can begin to learn what that youth values, how they prioritize, and thinking areas that they might need guidance around. Building mastery is something that extracurriculars really support. So the key is not forcing a youth into something they don't want to be a part of. If basketball or fishing isn't their thing, work to find what fuels them. This is a plug for screening youth for their strengths, screening youth for their areas of interest, and what those already existing protective factors are around them. We want to build on what's present while introducing new relationships, new connections, and new skills. An example I have of this is I worked with a kid, he was multi-system involved youth, and he was a huge kid, right? Like an athletic build, everyone kind of pushed sports on him, right? Play basketball, play football. He had the body for it, right? He would have been excellent at it if it was something he wanted to do, but he hated the physicality of sports. He was like overwhelmed by kind of the different workouts and routines that they would do. And he would ultimately end up quitting, which perpetuated the script for him that he didn't finish things, that people were disappointed in him, and so forth and so on. But what he was super interested in was history. He could like devour 500-page books on history, like multiple books a week. And so in his senior year, unfortunately, it took that long. The people around him really started shifting gears on focusing on what he liked to do. So we got him connected to some campuses where he could sit in on classes around history, and he shifted kind of what he wanted to do, or I suppose the people around him shifted their idea of what they thought he would do, and went his direction, which was that he wanted to be a history teacher, and that built his confidence tremendously because we were able to get him into like think tank groups that mimicked what he was interested in, what he had stuff to say about. So that's just kind of one example of how we can at times miss the mark on what kids or youth are interested in mastering, by kind of putting our own ideas of what we think might be best on them based on whatever that is. So strong executive functioning and self-regulation skills, those are another protective factor that help youth respond positively to adversity. When we use these terms, self-regulation, executive functioning, we're referring to the mental abilities to plan, stay focused, and follow instruction, and balance the demands of multiple tasks that are happening at one time. Youth with strong executive functioning and self-regulation skills can prioritize tasks, they can set goals, and they're better equipped to control their impulses. They're able to filter out distractions and can accomplish assignments. No one's born with these skills, but everyone is born with the ability to develop them, and adults promote that development when they provide youth with regular routines, and when they model appropriate social behavior, and when they engage in supportive, trusting relationships with that youth. We should think about how we can make our interactions with youth consistent and reliable. We need to make sure we are regulated and calm before we engage with the youth. We can set up tasks that involve critical thinking and talk through how we made decisions ourselves. We can ask youth how they decided on one thing over the other to encourage their own reflective thought on their decision making. And it's helpful to start small. So for youth who haven't had these skills modeled to them from infancy, because that's where it starts, choices and decisions that might seem simple can be incredibly overwhelming. In these programs, we need to ensure that youth and their families know what to expect each time they walk through the doors. Think about scheduling. Youth need to be able to prepare for what is ahead, and so do their caregivers. Consider how to infuse executive functioning and self-regulation skills into programs that teach youth about their tribe, that give them traditional skills and remind them that they're part of a larger collective. Having youth give back to their community is a great way to accomplish both those things. And it's often a good idea to offer some kind of clinical support for youth, either through in-school therapy or counseling or referrals to therapists within the community. Clinicians working with youth who have experienced trauma can learn how to encourage executive functioning and self-regulation through their training and various evidence-based treatment models that usually take place in one-on-one or group therapy. So I just wanted to take a second again for the chat box or raise your hand to unmute. We've talked about 4 protective factors that are well supported with research that have substantial evidence suggesting they build resilience and buffer kids from the negative consequences of trauma or adversity. But I wanted to take a moment to ask you all if there are other protective factors you see supporting youth within your own communities. Because I think that that was kind of what I opened with, right? There's what the research supports, and then there's also what we know based on our own experiences in our own communities. So if anyone would be willing to raise their hand or chat it in the chat box, just what protective factors have you seen support the youth in your communities? Give you all a couple minutes to think on that. Confidence in their own skills, absolutely. And just thinking how much the adults around kids and the programs around kids can help build that confidence by giving them a showcase for those skills and a place to practice them. Thank you. Being inclusive of youth and community programs and activities. Excellent, right? Creating programs for all, not just the identified few, right? And then we can avoid some of that othering that might happen if one program is designed for at-risk youth and the other programs are designed for all youth, like that. Paul says, now I see the need to educate parents on learning skills for those who are choosing to homeschool children. Absolutely. Right, we are in a different era and time and space than many of us have been in our lifetime. And so thinking through how do we do these protective factors in the new world that we're in right now. Appreciate that, Paula. Just make sure no one's hand is up.
One hand briefly had come up. I'm not sure if Inola, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. You're unmuted now if you'd like to speak.
Right, I see another comment, educate parents on technology as well. Absolutely. We talk a lot about these protective factors supporting youth and young people, but that is not to say they aren't helpful for adults as well, right? It just looks a little different based on their development and whatnot. Okay. Going to move us on here, but feel free to continue chatting if things are coming up for you. Most often, youth involved in juvenile justice are also involved in other systems or programs. So a trauma-informed approach really challenges us to have that holistic perspective, which also requires us to work across systems to ensure youth are receiving consistent messaging. And to do this, there's no way around it. We have to be in collaboration with one another. And I think this is a good place to say again that youth who may not naturally bounce back from adversity quite like their peers still can learn resilience through the adults and programs that are routine in their life. Each adult they have a connection with and each program they participate in has the opportunity to shape how they react and how they cope with their challenges. And they do this by grounding that youth in their cultural identity, by being a safe and trustworthy adult, and through programming that builds those self-regulation skills and increases mastery and executive functioning. The systems in place to support vulnerable young people affect resilience. I mean, it has to be said that many of these systems, most of these systems, are a product of colonialization and have institutionalized racism embedded within them. But as programs are built by tribes, for Indigenous people, there's an opportunity to really consider how they can affect resilience. We have to think of the messages that youth have been sent and have internalized as they walk through the front doors of our programs, internalized throughout their lifetime. They're often messages that they are bad, that people don't stick around when things get hard, that they aren't smart because they get bad grades, that they won't graduate because no one in their family has, and that they will ultimately follow in the footsteps of some relative who's really struggled. When we're part of a system that serves these youth, it's our role to rewrite that script. Adolescence is a time of huge growth in the brain. It's second only to those first 3 years of life. And this is a time that neural pathways can be altered and that intrinsic belief systems about self and the world around them can be established in a more positive light. So you all are the other half of that resiliency equation. You're the environmental influences, and with the right supports, youth can learn to be resilient regardless of what their genetic predispositioning for it might be. So with what we know about what builds youth resilience, here are some considerations for programs. Remember a holistic approach. It's essential to know what services the youth and family are participating in and collaborate with others to ensure the whole family's needs are met and that consistent messaging is being received by the family. Youth will exist in the back part of their brain, that fight, flight, freeze, if they don't feel safe. So work to understand what the youth needs from your program to feel safe while receiving services. And determine if the youth's basic needs are met for food, clothing, shelter, and if they aren't, collaborate across the community to meet the essential basic needs. Strengths-based and resilience-focused screenings for youth are essential. Focus on what strengths exist within youth, their family, and their communities so that we can build on those. And equally important is to know the youth's history of trauma. This information will support those working with youth to avoid those unintentional triggers and to understand behaviors with a more empathetic lens. Remember, at the root of resilience is connection. How do you and your program build connection with youth? And then how do you know if it's being received by the youth? Be intentional with services, focus on building mastery and giving the youth a sense of control. Use connection to traditional ways of being to accomplish each protective factor while giving that youth a foundation in the role they play within their tribe. With that, I'm going to pass it back over to Marilyn.
Yes. So how do we do this, right? How do we enhance the safety and accountability of our youth in order to help build their resilience? And I want to really bring forward that we do all of these strategies not when the youth or the child is dysregulated, not when they've been triggered, but in those times when we've established a good relationship with them, we established an alliance, and we can practice those skills when we are able to really listen, so that we get so good at it that when the youth does become dysregulated because they're triggered by a traumatic event reminder, we are able to support them by saying, remember how to breathe, remember how to do visualization, remember how to do some thought stopping, those kinds of strategies. So you have to establish an alliance with the youth. And that means that we really identify their strengths, not just their problems. And I think sometimes in juvenile justice that can be something that we forget. And really instilling a sense of hope and encouragement that they are capable, they are able, and that there is hope for the future. And then again, thinking about how do we practically address some of the issues that the kids face. So, and thinking about not just regulating their emotions or understanding their triggers, but what sort of real practical solutions can we does a child want to join a basketball team but can't afford the shoes, right? Does another young woman want to be able to be a good mom, and so she wants to take parenting classes? How do we support what it is that they want to do, and what does that look like? And then building on those strengths and their competencies. So it really does foster in them a sense of empowerment and an ability to change. So young people may more likely listen attentively as they're taught stress reduction strategies when they're, as I said, when they're not stressed, strategies that could include exercises to help them learn to relax, to distract themselves, mindfulness, meditation, as Laura said earlier, long distance running, joining sports, doing art, talking to grandma, whatever it is that helps them really manage their stress. They really will appreciate adult guidance and acknowledgement that their lives are becoming more complex, right? As their hormones begin to rage and as the expectations begin to change about their behaviors and the expectations about from school and stress from school and sports, those sorts of things. Just know that they may not want to listen to their parents in order to help reduce stress. So it's not, I often used to hear a long time ago, not so much anymore, a lot of teachers say that parents should be doing that. Well, our parents are struggling, right? Our parents may have, some issues that they are struggling with, like a mental health disorder, like depression, or they may have a substance use disorder. Rather than judging them, let's be that person that supports and stands with them in order to support their youth as they get through their own issues. So they also, at this age, you can access web-based materials, written materials, and then especially around stress management strategies that might work for them. Next slide. I see questions and answers. Let me look really fast. Okay, are there valid instruments that are effective at measuring strengths and weaknesses in Native American adolescents? And there are, and what we can do when we send the PowerPoint out to you all is provide a resource list to you so that you can look for them yourself. Okay, so using the language of resilience. So reminding ourselves, I just really like these. These come from parent and teen building resilience in teens, really thinking about the kinds of statements we make or the way that we question someone. So really thinking about and just asking the question, what's going on? How do you understand what's happening to you? What do you understand about what happened last night, right? What does that look like to you? And so then we can be able to hear what they think rather than saying, you don't get it, right? That isn't what happened last night. Or you're here because you broke the law, or whatever those kinds of statements is. It's like if the adolescent says, I don't know why I'm here. Well, you're here because you broke the law. Rather than that, just think about how to phrase it in a much more supportive, strengths-based way, or looking at their perspectives. What do you think about this situation? Instead of saying, here's what you need to do. You need to straighten up and fly right, or as my grandmother used to say to me, because she wasn't trauma informed. And it never worked. So, and then talking about their problem solving, not your solutions, right? So a simple thing like, how do you think you can stay out of juvie? Right? Instead of saying you need to stop hanging with those kids and go home before curfew and stay out of juvie. Or you might say, what are some ideas for improving your grades? And you need, instead of saying you need to study and focus more, right? Okay. So we just really want to reiterate that there is a language of building resilience, and it's about really supporting the youth and meeting them where they're at and helping them understand that you're there as an ally to build that alliance with them so that they are better able and help build practices for them when they're not triggered, when they're not in trouble, when they're able to then remind them what helps them to do better, to feel better, to know how to respond better. Next slide. You go, Laura.
Thanks, Marilyn. So some suggestions we have for a tiered response to building resilience for the youth being served are highlighted above on this triangle here. And at the National Native Children's Trauma Center, we really believe that at the foundation of any program wanting to provide trauma-informed services is a shared understanding of resilience within Indigenous youth, families, and communities, and how to harness that resilience to buffer against the impacts of historical and intergenerational trauma. And it's also true, of course, that policies and procedures focused on trauma-informed language and service delivery will help sustain those efforts over time. Targeted efforts look more at programs focusing on some of these protective factors we talked about on how to build resilience. And oftentimes their services targeted in group settings. So group skill building, group outings, an opportunity for peers to connect and learn from one another with the guidance of a safe, healthy adult. And that highest tier there indicated focuses more on services individually tailored to a youth identified. And usually those youth are the ones identified as in greatest need. It could look like clinical support, like one-on-one mentoring, or more intensive treatment or case planning. And we are going to include in the email to follow with the evaluation and resources and whatnot, a PDF of the training and technical assistance that we can offer to programs if they're wanting to look at how to enhance their services to be more trauma-informed and resiliency focused.
All right, so as we're closing this out this hour, let's have a little bit of a conversation. So what's worked to build resilience in your communities with your work, or what's something you now want to explore as an additional way to support youth resilience? And you can either raise your hand and talk with us, or go into the Q&A, or go to chat. So Ashley, Laura S, and Laura G, do we see anything in chat or anything in the Q&A?
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, all right. Oh, there's 3.
A question just actually came through on the question box. If you'd like, I can read it, Marilyn.
Yeah, it says, please send me a copy as well. I do recall you saying that you may send it out. Yes, we will send out the PowerPoint. We'll send out the resources, and we'll send out our TTA that we are able to provide to folks. So I think what we'll do is, next slide. Okay, here's another question in chat. I would think what I would like to do is use ACEs, but also look at the resilience survey that they also use, so that we can see where we are and what we are lacking and what needs to be addressed. You can use the ACEs. One of the things that does happen though is that we have to make the assumption very often in tribal communities that, especially for those youth involved in juvenile justice, that they already have very high ACEs scores. What it can do is help you be able to visit with them about what that means for them. But other than that, there's many more useful assessments that you can use that really will support the youth in building resilience. It would be helpful to have a polling of youth to find out how safe they feel in the community to speak to issues important to them. I think that's a brilliant idea. I think that very often we we think we know what the youth need because we remember what we needed as a youth. And that's not necessarily what's happening today. Olivia says, but I was wondering about knowing what resilience factors they already have in place and where they need more support. Yes, that's definitely a resilience screen would definitely be helpful in, as Laura was describing, it may be that they've got a great relationship with their dad, but they need support. So they don't need a mentor. They need some other supports to build resilience in another area of their life. Laura, do you want to add anything?
I was just going to say, I think what you're highlighting, Olivia, and then what Jeff had posted in the Q&A, just asking if there are instruments that are effective in measuring strengths and weaknesses for Native youth, just brings up this point that it's so important to select tools, design resiliency screens and protective factors like identification tools around like what exists within the communities you're in, because tribes are so unique, and it's just really hard to generalize and say that one tool will be helpful for all, without making sure that folks are kind of adapting it to make sure they're asking the questions that they need to know about their youth, their programs that exist and operate within their own very unique communities and tribal cultures.
So Lulu in the question and answer says, how as adults can we be more open-minded? I was raised as it's my roof, I pay the bills and my rules. As a parent, it's harder for me to acknowledge my own issues in being able to teach my son resilience as I struggle with depression, PTSD, and those emotional, mental, and physical trauma. So yeah, I think that the big piece of the conversation that we often have with service providers and with parents is that really going towards your own healing, developing your own wellness strategies can go a long way in helping you support the youth. I think that they're also understanding what behaviors mean. I'm always saying this. Some people say, put your trauma lens on. I always picture the minions from Despicable Me with the goggles and say, put your trauma goggles on and keep them on, because what usually happens is that we trigger the youth or they trigger us. And before you know it, we're all both exhibiting behaviors that are helpful, and it's all about being triggered rather than just being jerks or stinkers or not uncaring. So Kim Lowry says, I participated in a training that taught about different styles of communicating with millennials and baby boomers, etc. It was very important to be able to converse on each level with the generation and that we can understand one another.
So true.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to the getting well yourself?
No, I don't think so, other than we always say we have to prioritize our own healing in order to be able to work with people who, and trauma, right? But very few people get to be immune from adversity in their lifetime. And so I think that that's just an important message, is that we have to make sure we're healing ourselves as we do the work that we do with kids. Yeah, and Kim just said, be mindful of our own triggers and trauma. That's a piece of it, right? We need to, one of the ways we can create solid relationships with youth is by being self-regulated ourselves. And it's hard to be regulated when we're triggered to something that reminds us of our own trauma history. So finding some tools, whether they're breathing exercises, whether they're visualization techniques, whether it's splashing cold water on your face or taking a walk, those sorts of tools we need in our toolbox to be able to help ourselves come back to calm, so that we can do what the task is in front of us.
Kim, I also want to talk about, having to communicate with millennials versus baby boomers. I think that what is most important is that we really truly engage in a really authentic relationship with the youth or with their parents, so that we don't stereotype. Oh, you're a millennial, so here's how you think, or oh, you're a baby boomer, so here's how you think and behave. But really becoming authentic, I think that's what crosses generations, and very often in talking with some communities who utilize elders, really helping the elders learn the language of resilience, because many of our elders have gone through so many traumatic events and experiences, for instance, the boarding school experience, that they may not have the language, and we may have to teach them the language. I have a relative who talked about how she was on a call with some elders versus some younger people, and the younger people knew more about their culture and understood more of their language than the elders did, simply because all of that was robbed from them and taken from them because of boarding school. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. Do we want to do the video, or do we want to just move on? We'll move on. We're going to send the link to a video that was developed during the Defending Childhood Initiative at the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. It starts out very heavy, but it ends very hopeful. And it's just basically a coach that made the difference in the life of a child or an adolescent right when they needed it. And it was just him being attentive and building authentic relationship and caring about that youth. He ended up being the only person that came to that youth's high school graduation when the youth's family didn't come. So we do have the power to make a difference in individual and family lives. So next slide.
And here are a list of the resources that we referenced throughout, and you'll saw several links in the PowerPoint, which will be sent out, but some good sources for you all.
Giselle asked if we can put the link in chat. Do we have, can you do that, Laura? Laura S?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll look that up right now and then
Okay.
put it in there.
So Enola says that our tribal schools from preschool to high school have been using conscious discipline to help students to learn how to self-regulate and the brain states, and students take these lessons home to their parents. Excellent. Love it. So want to close with reminding everyone that we are the Tribal Youth Resource Center, and we provide culturally based and trauma-informed training, support, and technical assistance to all OJJDP funded tribal youth programs and tribal juvenile healing to wellness court grantees, but we also provide TTA for any federally recognized tribe in the United States. So you don't have to be a grantee to request our services. And here, because you're going to be getting the PowerPoint, you'll be able to link into all of our website, our phone numbers, are basically our contact information. Next slide. So again, wanting to remind everyone that the Tribal Law and Policy Institute and the National Native Children's Trauma Center is in partnership, and we are combined. We are the Tribal Resource Center. So we are Native owned and operated nonprofits dedicated to providing free publication resources, comprehensive training, technical assistance for Native nations, and tribal justice systems. But for us at the National Native Children Trauma Center, we don't just serve tribal justice systems. We work in child welfare, primary care, behavioral health, schools. I can't just think of a system that touches the life of a child, and we're probably somewhere in the United States working in that system with a tribal community. So thank you, everyone. Okay, yes, Eleanor, we can provide TTA to y'all. No, this grant funds for all of you to know, because you don't have to be a grantee, and our services are free, and we provide it nationally. All right, Laura, take it away. Laura S.
There's an evaluation coming in the chat box that you can click the link to for today's webinar. It'll also have a link in the follow-up email where we thank you for your participation today. But those do really help us kind of understand what went well and what we can improve upon. And of course, any ideas you have for future online learning events. So to conclude, I think we would just really like to say thank you all for your time today. Thank you for the work that you do for your communities, for the families, and for the children that you know. And as we go out into all of our different places today. Just wishing you all good health and safety during this time. So thank you for your time today and your participation. It was excellent discussion today.
Thank you. Be
Till next
well.
time.